why are refugees in refugee camps for so long? I mean, I don't think most violent conflicts last 20 years. I mean, I might be wrong about that just in my understanding of violent conflicts around the world, but it is a little bit strange to me that someone would be in a refugee camp from the DRC for 20 years, like in Uganda for 20 years. So why are refugees in these camps for so long?
Yeah. Well, let's start with the DRC. So people are familiar with the Rwandan genocide. That war really transplanted from Rwanda into the DRC. So the history of this specific conflict goes back to, 1994. So you're right to say that it's not been hot conflict this whole time.
Right.
But to say that there's not active ongoing conflict for the last 30 years would not be accurate.
Hi, and welcome to the Simple Charity Podcast. I'm your host, Brian Grasso. And this Christmas season, I have a series of 3 interviews for you about loving refugees. This year, we've seen many headlines about global conflicts, and at the same time, the United States has nearly entirely cut its refugee resettlement program. And this felt like an appropriate Christmas topic as we celebrate the story of Jesus' birth, which of course immediately preceded his family fleeing violent persecution and living as refugees. In these 3 episodes, we'll learn all about the journey that refugees take, beginning with life in refugee camps, which is this episode. Then in the next episode, we'll learn about America's refugee resettlement program. And then finally, I'll share a conversation on the current politics of refugee care. Today on the show, I interview Scott Key, one of the co-founders of Every Shelter, a nonprofit that helps refugees create good homes for themselves. I learned a lot on this episode about the nuances between internally displaced people and refugees, about how long refugees typically stay in camps, and about the shelter options that are available for them. I had this conversation with Scott back in April, and I'm excited to release it as part of this Christmas series. Join me for a conversation about building homes for refugees during their time in camps. This is your podcast, so as always, please send me your thoughts, your questions, and suggestions at brian@simplecharity.org. I will read your emails, and if this show is helpful to you, please click a 5-star rating in your podcast app and go ahead and leave a review and subscribe as well. All these little actions help get the show out to more listeners. Thank you for doing that. I'm so glad you're with us today.
Hi, my name is Melissa, and I serve as a Simple Charity philanthropic advisor to individuals, couples, families, foundations, and family offices in the Raleigh-Durham, Chapel Hill area of North Carolina, but also to clients around the country. If you're curious about your own generosity journey and would like help thinking through a philanthropic strategy with intentionality to discern where God is calling you to love people, to find excellent nonprofits to partner with, or to understand the impact of your current grant making, I would love to connect and share more about Simple Charity's philanthropic advising offerings. You can connect with me at melissahall@simplecharity.org. That's melissahall@simplecharity.org. And you can learn more about us at simplecharity.org. That's simplecharity.org.
Scott, welcome to the Simple Charity Podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here, Brian.
I'm excited you're here too. What are you grateful for today, Scott?
My wife is a painter, and she just finished a commission that she's really proud of, and it's really amazing. And so I just I saw it today for the first time, and she was so content with it, and I personally think it's beautiful. So yeah, that's what I'm grateful for today. My wife finished a great painting.
That's amazing. Is that her main gig? Is painting?
Yeah. So for a long time she's been a photographer, and then for the last 5 years it's been more painting. And so she's got kind of a steady stream of commissions, and this one is for somebody particularly meaningful for her. And I think she had a lot of she felt a lot of pressure to do a really great job, and I think she's really proud of it. And I thought it was amazing. So yeah.
Does she have particular style or kind of? This is a great. This is so interesting that your wife is a painter.
Yeah, it's pretty abstract and floral, and she mixes a lot of medias into it. So in this painting, she literally quilted She literally quilted a piece and then pasted it on there and painted over it. And
Hmm.
she's been reading a lot of N.T. Wright lately, and um, I see that in her painting, and I think that's intentional too. Just um, seeing moments of the kingdom, and so I mean, it's just it's been
Mm.
such a kind of therapeutic and like spiritual practice for her. Her painting has been, and it's like I think people more and more are starting to see that in her work. So it's just neat. You know, it's neat to see your spouse really catch their stride. So
Yeah.
so it's been neat. It's been neat, and it's just a great painting, and yeah, to see her proud of it was nice. So
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. That's fantastic. Um,
yeah,
so Scott, you are a architect
yep.
and the founder of a nonprofit that um, serves refugees in refugee camps around the world. And I feel like if we could work in some sort of like illustration of how your work is connected to like painting and the good theology of art, that would be
Yeah,
amazing. I
that
don't
would
I
be
don't know. That
amazing.
might be a bridge, a chasm too far to cross.
I'll think about
Um,
it.
we'll see if we can make that happen during the episode. But let's just start real quick. Give us the high level, 30 to 60-second overview of who you are, where in the world are you calling from, and what does Every Shelter do?
I am Scott Key. I am one of the co-founders of Every Shelter. I am here in Houston, Texas, where Every Shelter is headquartered. Um, our larger staff is in Uganda. We have some support staff here in the States. And then about Every Shelter, the simplest way to say it is we help refugees create good homes for themselves.
Hmm.
Um, all of those words are intentional. We help them create homes for themselves. Um, there's 122 million people displaced right now. And the statistic that really got me into this work in the first place was that refugees stay displaced much, much longer than I thought and many people think. Refugees are displaced for decades on average. So whatever you draw into your mind as like what a refugee shelter looks like is likely inadequate, to put it nicely, for decades of displacement.
Mm.
So yeah,
122 million.
displaced persons. Yeah.
Yeah. And so what drives displacement? How do you define displacement? Is this someone who, is driven out of their country? Do they have to cross a border? Is it just that they are not in their home?
Yeah. So displacement is the broad term for people who have been forcibly displaced or forced from their home. Most often that's conflict. Many Americans are aware of, Ukrainian refugees, refugees from South Sudan and Sudan right now, Central African Republic. Venezuela is kind of an exception. It's not necessarily conflict that's driving that, but they're still considered
Right.
refugees. So the refugee is defined by someone who crosses a border. Displacement's the broader term for. There's actually more internally displaced persons than there are refugees.
Oh, okay.
But the UN actually has a standard definition for what that means, and that's when we classify somebody as a refugee versus an IDP versus a migrant.
Yep.
Those are all legal classifications that do matter in certain terms. But in my experience, we've worked with IDPs, we've worked with refugees. Frequently, the conditions are quite similar, and the
Right.
problems that we're trying to solve are very similar. So,
Yeah. I mean, I think like to personalize, I think large global issues like this can feel very distant, but I'm imagining if I was forced to leave my house with my family and go because of violent conflict in coming Georgia, which I don't think is going to happen anytime soon. And I was in a different part of America, like living in a camp with my family. I think I would imagine that would feel very similar in its trauma than if I had to, I don't know, cross the border to Canada or something. You're to be forcibly uprooted from your life because of a violent conflict is a traumatic experience.
yeah,
Yeah.
we have a photo exhibition up right now in Houston for the month of April, featuring the work of a war photographer in the DRC Congo, and he's just really documenting the conflict there. But one of the things that really comes out in the images in this exhibition are what it looks like to be internally displaced and what those camps look like. And we have a series of 3 images of a internally displaced camp that was attacked in December, and it's just burned out. And one of the things that really strikes you, I think, when you see the exhibition is how logical it is to cross a border and become officially a refugee.
Right.
I'm not even safe in this place. And so it's quite the choice to leave the place where you're a citizen, where you have rights. That is a huge choice. And so it's right to think of somebody making that choice based very squarely out of fear, very well-founded fear. There's not a lot of advantages to being a refugee. Leaving the place where you have rights and citizenship is a big decision. But I think the thing that this photo exhibition does so well is it really conveys that that's a very appropriate choice. There are not a lot of places for people to be safe in the DRC Congo right now, in the eastern part of DRC.
Did your wife help with the photography?
She didn't.
Okay.
She didn't. It's actually featuring a self-taught Congolese war photographer.
Oh wow,
named
that's awesome.
Moses Sawasawa.
Huh.
And I followed him for years. It's a hard place to get accurate, kind of up-to-date news from. We serve a lot of refugees from the DRC, and so in Uganda specifically. And so I followed him for years, and he's just been such an amazing source of news. And when you know that he's self-taught, it adds another level of amazement to his work, because he's phenomenal. I mean, from any kind of like objective standard of photography, he's a great photographer. So it was really a joy to work with him and a curator to kind of put this exhibition together and just tell people, just about what's happening there. So.
Does he have like a website or something that we could put in the show notes of the portfolio? And
Instagram is kind of his jam. Yep. I'm not on Instagram anymore, but Moses Sawasawa, I can send.
That's
humble brag
choices.
Yeah.
The rest of us wish we were not on Instagram anymore.
I miss life updates, and I miss a lot of the designers that I love to follow. But it's been a good choice for me. But and I miss following Moses, frankly speaking.
Yep.
I feel like I am missing out on some of the things that he posts. But that would be the best place to follow him, and he's pretty active. I have a lot of admiration for him. In between planning this exhibition, he would be out shooting combat, and so it was just kind of surreal, because it's like I'm just having my day in the U.S. in my office. And then Moses gets on, and like you're looking at posts that he just posted, and it's just like, your life right now is unreal, and you are so brave. And anyway, yeah.
So I want to talk about the DRC and what's happening in your work in Uganda. I want to talk about your work with Syrian refugees. But before we get to that, let's actually back up a little bit, and we'd love to hear the origin story. So what made you decide to start a nonprofit? Something that we had a previous call a little bit commiserating with each other. I don't know if that's the right way to say it.
Probably.
Starting a nonprofit is not an easy career path. There are all sorts of things that are hard about it. One is what we call the stakeholder gap, that the people you serve are not the people who fund the thing. And so as problems grow in the world, and as your programs are successful, I like to say, for a nonprofit, for a business, success leads to more success. Your programs or products or services are assets. For a nonprofit, success leads to more liability. As the programs grow, as you get more demand for the thing you're offering, then you actually have to go find the money. And those systems and feedback loops are not always attuned. So anyways, I'm not just trying to complain here, but just to say, starting a nonprofit, super hard thing to do. What made you want to take the leap and actually do this with your career?
I'll briefly start way far back, which is I had an Old Testament professor in college who really planted a lot of seeds about using your vocation for the kingdom, and seeing your work, your skills, your professional experiences as a way that can build the kingdom, and not just. And I don't say not just, but my kind of evangelical upbringing was, what you do at work is to invite people to church.
Right.
And not that the actual meat and heart of your work can actually be a part of building the kingdom. And so that was fascinating for me as an 18-year-old, and I look back at that as really kind of the origin in a lot of ways. It's why I went to architecture school. I was fascinated by design's ability to solve hard problems. There were lots of designers, Alejandro Aravena, Rural Studio. There were several designers that I was just fascinated with, and it was just like, man, they can bring newness. They can bring solutions to hard problems, and I loved that creativity could do that. So, in architecture school, I went into it saying I want to do something humanitarian. I had no idea what that would be. And when I was a student, I learned that refugees stay displaced for decades. And that was shocking, and it should be shocking. And I'll probably say it 3 more times.
Yeah.
I'll probably keep saying it on this podcast because it's the central organizing, kind of reality. It's a long time. We learned it. I was working on a shelter project as a student. It was kind of a research, the easiest way to say it was doing a research project around shelter globally. And that statistic really jumped out at me. Because you think refugee and you think temporary, right? That's right. The majority of people think that. I've never lived anywhere for 20 years, that's a generation. That's definitionally a generation. So that statistic really jumped out at us. At the same time, we were reading stories. This is circa 2011, 2012. It was really before the Syrian conflict entered the zeitgeist fully. We were reading stories about Syrian refugees and Afghan refugees freezing to death in the middle of the night. And that was really, the statistic around the displacement, and I'll say it again, 20 years on average. And then people freezing to death in the middle of the night. It was like, it was wrong. It felt wrong. And it felt like something that we could solve. I used to cold weather camp. We had some initial intuitions about how we might be able to help people not freeze to death. It led us to invent the product that we still manufacture today, which is an insulated flooring system. Insulating a tent is hard. If you're going to insulate anything, insulate the ground. That's where refugees spend the majority of their time. They don't have furniture. And so as students, we started pursuing what became emergency floor. We very singularly focused on flooring outside of a hypothermic condition, a place that's cold, living in the dirt. You might believe me when I say that's bad for your health. There's a lot of data now that backs that up. It's bad for children in particular with diarrhea, parasitic infections, et cetera. So we really singularly focused as 2 students, and then subsequently 5 years after that, as Scott and Sam, creating this product called Emergency Floor, working under the UNHCR with USAID funding in Lebanon. We spent about 5 years working with families in Lebanon to scale that up.
Did you still get USAID funding until this year?
No, only ever the seed capital. It was a specific program within USAID that was sort of more venture minded, more risk taking than their typical portfolio. And so I would say we were at quite a big risk to recent graduates from architecture school who had a cool idea, maybe cool. But really that seed capital was how we were able to get in the field, actually start validating that this might be a way to prevent hypothermia. And we spent the next 5 years working with a lot of NGOs in the Lebanese context, scaling that up. And the last 4 years have been really focused on the Turkish Syrian side of it. We've been working inside of a Syrian refugee camp, IDP camp inside Syria, and with refugees in Turkey for the last 4. So we still manufacture that product in Turkey. It still has a lot of impact. That's really, all of this is leading up to us founding Every Shelter. Every Shelter does not exist at this point. This is Scott and Sam with 2 full-time jobs, kind of popping into the Middle East, up to 6 times a year.
And when is this? What year is this?
2015 is when we landed the grant. That's when I defended my thesis for my master's. And 2020 is when we shifted our focus to Turkey, and 2019 is when we officially formed Every Shelter.
So by the time Every Shelter is formed, how many households have you given this flooring to in refugee camps?
About 11,000 households. I think that's right. Um, you know,
So you're very much. I mean, gosh, I need to stop using business speak to talk about nonprofit. I was gonna say in market. Like you're like,
yeah,
you're in the
that's
market,
fine. You
Scott.
can, yeah,
You've
sure.
given flooring to
Yeah.
11,000
Yeah. Households.
traumatized families.
Yeah.
And I guess if we can use market speak for that, then but the product has been validated. The what
Yes.
you're doing, you're starting to see the results and the impact of what you're doing. And
Yeah.
so is that part of like, okay, hey, we actually have something here, and that's a part of wanting to formalize it into a nonprofit structure and grow it?
No, actually.
Okay.
So I was actually sharing this with one of our newer employees today. I remember the first survey we did with the first 40 families that got our home, or I'm sorry, the first 40 families that got our floors. I remember getting the first survey back a month in, and it was just unanimously successful. You
Hmm.
know, families loved it. It was clearly solving a problem. And I was conveying to an employee today, just like, that was one of the greatest feelings that I've ever had, of just
Hmm.
like, man, at that point we were 3 years students speculating, hoping that we could actually have an impact. And I just remember seeing that first report and just being like, man, I think we're onto something. Um, we scaled up with no fundraising to that number, all through sales to NGOs in the space. And so that was really validating. I thought we at that point we thought we would be product designers in this space, that we could build,
Hmm.
a for-profit business doing this. Obviously, social enterprise, impact focus, but um, and then we started experiencing a lot of things that, like, the system that overlays over all refugee relief kind of came into its form for us.
Hmm.
We say, refugees exist in a system that was never designed for 20 years of displacement. That's the
Right.
nice, tidy way of saying it. But what was ultimately happening that we started to learn was that the world had stopped caring about Syrian refugees. And what we were seeing was that year
Yeah.
after year, it became less and less sustainable for us to make sales into that product. And it really was because the world's attention was waning.
Mm-hmm.
And when the world's attention was waning, the funding was waning. And so I could talk a lot about that system, how, year-long grant cycles really, especially as it relates to permanent things like your home, shelter, really impact the decisions that you make and the quality, and how much waste happens because of that.
You say
But
1 year long grant cycles?
yeah, yeah.
One
So
year
most,
from who? From USAID? With USAID, I always think 5 year, like a 5 year cycle.
so the world wrongly thinks in terms of temporary, thinking with refugees.
Right. Right.
Um, and the elephant in the room is that it's much longer than that. But there's always this, like, they might go home, right?
Right.
And so, no, we see 1 year grant cycles. That's normal. There's some funders, but we are talking, to your question, we are talking about institutional funders. This is not
Yep.
private philanthropy. This
Yep.
is USAID that filters through the UNHCR,
Yeah.
OCHA. It's
Yeah.
kind of
Multilateral.
but they're government. The money
Mm-hmm.
originates
Mm-hmm.
with governments, and then follows varying channels. But yeah, their year-long awards. Well, if somebody needs, that might mean the difference between putting in another tarp that lasts for a few months versus a more permanent material. It definitely means you're not investing in the local economy and materials, which
Mm-hmm.
is a huge part of what we do. So to finally answer your question, why do we form Every Shelter? It's
To fix all these problems, Scott.
Yeah, no, and this is going to sound maybe too grandiose, but it was like, man, at some scale, can we create an alternative system that works better?
Right.
You know,
Yep.
can we think more long term? When you think about, if you accept 20 years, which you should, well, 86% of refugees live in developing countries. These are places that we want to invest in anyway from a livelihood standpoint. Well, we're importing everything into these contexts. We're importing these bad tarps. We're importing all these, these solutions that don't work well. Well, what if we could make those things there and employ people in these places? And what if we could actually, mobilize the materials that you find in these countries? You save on shipping, you save, but you can make better decisions. And so when we formed Every Shelter, the kind of grand vision was like, man, like, the term that we use is localization. Like, can we
Yeah.
localize
Yeah.
response? And there's so much in localizing production, procurement,
Yep.
thinking like an architect, understanding the variables that are at play for a refugee's house, the materials that are available, involving refugees in the construction process. So there's so much baked into the thesis that we had that it's like, if we think about a refugee response in terms of that specific place, we don't have to solve it for the globe, but we can build a model that solves it in one place.
Yep.
And then maybe that model is replicable. And so, yeah, that's why we started it. It was, everything was messed up, everything was broken, and we had maybe a grand notion that we could build at least like a city on a hill or some example of an alternative system that works a lot better.
Yeah, that's great, Scott. And one of the things I often think about is when we encounter brokenness in systems, there's a few options to bring redemption to that. One is to accept the current system and to try to operate within it and to kind of create a subsystem that's good. One is to try to reform the system to kind of shift it towards something good. And then another is to build something new and to actually to build a new institution, which is extremely difficult, but something, it's certainly harder to build than it is to criticize.
Yes, that is right.
And there's a lot of our current media economy is built on criticizing broken systems.
Yeah.
But I think it's awesome that you wanted to build one. So what was that journey like of, so you launched this nonprofit, I think you said in 2019, 2020, around then. Mm-hmm. It's been a weird 5 years. I came full time to Simple Charity in 2019, so we're kind of on parallel tracks here.
Yeah, a bad time to start a nonprofit.
Yes. So yeah, what have you learned in this journey so far since 2019, and how has your original thesis adjusted so far?
Yeah, the first priority was to scale our floors, and we had proven impact. Our floors really are as simple as money, plus manufacturing equals impact, right? We have great partnerships, and so really, the first priority was, we're manufacturing in Turkey. Let's help refugees in Syria and Syrian refugees in Turkey. But we knew that we wanted to pick a country. We wanted to be in a refugee context where we could see the scope of displacement. Uganda was that place. Uganda hosts now 1.9 million refugees from 13 different countries. And so you have refugees in the Ugandan context that many of them have been there for 2-3 decades. And yet there are also refugees who are still arriving. The other reason why Uganda was a really great choice for us is Uganda has some of the most generous policies towards refugees. They have, I've worked with refugees in at least 6 different countries, and I've never experienced a place that has quite as generous policies. And so for us, especially having experience working in Turkey, Lebanon, your existence as an organization is always very precarious in those places. We knew that we wanted to experiment, that we wanted to try things that didn't exist. And so we did not want the variable of maybe not being able to be there anymore as an organization. We knew that we needed time to bake the things that we're doing. The first thing that we did in Uganda was we said, can we manufacture the number one non-food item that refugees need, which is the tarp? The UN High Commissioner for Refugees, their tarp lasts 3 to 6 months.
Oh my gosh, are you serious?
That meets nobody's standards, right?
That's insane. Who made that decision, Scott? You refugee, to repeat the stat that hopefully every listener will walk away with. Refugees live in camps for 20 years.
Yeah,
on average is what I've heard you say, and the TARP that the UN Commission on Refugees, I don't know the full acronym, the TARP provided by the UN lasts 3 to 6 months.
Yeah.
Why?
And they'll tell you it lasts 12 months.
Okay. Well, so even 12 months is...
But even 12 is not successful in the context of what we're talking about.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
And so, when we were working in Lebanon, we experienced that a lot. I mean, if you think about a tarp, if you're a refugee, for many refugees, this is literally this tiny little membrane. is the only thing that separates you from the outside world. So the elements, privacy, security, etc. Um, it is a wonderful project for emergencies. It's so fast, it's so affordable. I mean, it is an innovation of the 70s that was really pretty remarkable. But when you're talking about 20 years of displacement, even 12 months is not a successful product. We maybe this is too cynical, but we call it future trash. And so when we got started in Uganda, we were like, hey, can we make a tarp here? So not, thousands of miles away. Can we make it here? Can we make it more durable? Can we employ refugees in the process, and can we make it sustainable? We had experienced refugees in Lebanon who were using billboards, so the stuff that you see on the side of the road. We had seen a family of refugees that were using a billboard instead of a traditional tarp, and they had 2 years of use in it. It was a little bit of a light bulb moment from a product development standpoint, because it's like, hey, if this is really a waste stream, maybe it's free material, and the material itself is extremely durable. Like if I put a blindfold on you and I handed it to you, you'd be like, man, that's a really thick tarp. So from just like a starting place, we had a thesis that we may be able to collect this material for free. We could process it into a finished product that a refugee would be proud of. It's made out of PVC instead of HDPE. If this was a different podcast, I'd go nerdy on that. But it's more durable. You can repair it. You can heat weld it. And so we just started the process of building a partnership network in East Africa to collect this waste stream and learn how to then upcycle it into a roofing material that could last a refugee for 5 to 10 years.
Wow.
And so that was really how we got started in Uganda. It was really kind of our first few years of effort was just, hey, can we do this? And now we have partnerships with Pepsi, Anheuser-Busch, a lot of local billboard companies, a lot of the local cell phone companies, and we built up a collection network. And now this year we're transferring our business from every shelter manufacturing this product to a local business manufacturing this product.
Nice.
And so we're sort of on the tail end of that kind of the birthing process of that product, but we've been able to prove out that we can make a better product that's more durable, sustainable, that employs refugees in the process in this place.
That's awesome. So one question that is kind of coming up, well, a couple questions that are coming up as I'm hearing you describe the situation in refugee camps is, well, first of all, why are refugees in refugee camps for so long? I mean, I don't think most violent conflicts last 20 years. I mean, I might be wrong about that just in my understanding of violent conflicts around the world. I mean, I think about South Sudan and the DRC as kind of these two places where violent conflict is feeding into refugees in Uganda. And, there's been a lot of recent uptick in conflict in the DRC. But before that, it wasn't nearly as bad as it is right now,
right.
And it's kind of an on and off thing. But it is a little bit strange to me that someone would be in a refugee camp from the DRC for 20 years, like in Uganda for 20 years, because when I think about the last 20 years of history in the DRC, I don't think it's been constant conflict. And I might be wrong about my sub-Saharan African history there, but so why are refugees in these camps for so long?
Yeah. Well, let's start with the DRC. So people are familiar with the Rwandan genocide. That war really transplanted from Rwanda into the DRC. So the history of this specific conflict goes back to, 1994. So you're right to say that it's not been hot conflict this whole time.
Right.
But to say that there's not active ongoing conflict for the last 30 years would not be accurate. And so
it's
if
kind of
you
like
are
militias, but it's spotty is kind of my, but
right.
I guess, I don't know. I mean, if you're like, I don't know, I have kids, like if there was a risk that I would be going back to a place where a militia would like raid of my village, I would be really, really hesitant to go there, like even if it was somewhere I lived.
Well, and so last night we had an opening event for that exhibition last night, and we had a refugee who lives now here in Houston, who lived in this camp, who fled from DRC speak. And so let me convey his story. His dad was a pastor. He was also an activist, and his family was specifically targeted by one of the rebel groups, and so, for them it was, and that's not an uncommon story, that there's somebody in your family who's marked by some group, And so even if there's not active conflict, it's not a safe place to be. So, I mean, at the moment, and it seems like, not every decade, but it does heat up to the point where it's a mass displacement event. And we're in one of those right now.
Right.
But generally, it has been an unstable place. And if you are crossways with whoever's in control in your place, it would be a logical choice to leave. If you look at Syria, the civil war there started in 2011. It has had a lot of news recently. The Assad regime fell in December. A new regime led by a man who used to be a part of ISIS and Al Qaeda has taken over. 30% of refugees have gone home is the statistic that we're hearing. But there's still, that's 30% of 4.5 million who have fled. If you think about what is left in Syria right now, the towns, manufacturing, the economy, there is none, right? You're not going home to a job. You're going home to a leader who you're at best cautiously optimistic about. But there's been a lot of reprisal killings for people who, this group thinks were their enemies. And so it's a big decision to then go home. Because what are you going home to? And all of the countries around Syria have shut their borders off a long time ago to refugees. So the moment you cross back, you might not get to go back to this place where you've reached some level of safety and stability. So I think the Syrian conflict in DRC and South Sudan, they're all really great examples to kind of enumerate that decades of displacement. What we see with South Sudanese refugees in the north is kind of a revolving door where there feels like there's stability, and then something happens, and then they're back, and that's happening right now. So we've seen the camp where we work in the north go from 270,000 people to 202. Well, things are heating up in South Sudan again, and we're expecting that camp grows again. So, if you, Brian, are one of those people, at some point, do you just say, hey, it makes a lot more sense for me to try to build some sort of life in this other place? I
live in the suburbs and get so irrationally anxious about the safety of my kids that every night I walk up to my back door and make sure our doors are locked, because I'm like, in theory, someone could, in the suburbs of north of Atlanta, which is has super low crime rates, could sneak in through the back door and take one of my kids or something. I don't know. It just goes through my head. But I just am thinking like the psychology of this. I think we need to remember that people from other cultures are people. and from other countries, and this is a normal human behavior to be if there's a risk of physical harm or death from going back home, that's a pretty strong deterrent to not go back home.
And you and your wife can make certain safety decisions, but the moment you're a parent, it really changes.
Right.
I have two daughters, and it's what would I not do to keep them safe, right? And one statistic I want to throw in there while we're talking about parenting: 80% of the refugees who are coming in from the DRC are single moms with children. So the husband is out of the picture either because of forced military service, because they've been killed. So it's, when we talk about serving widows and orphans, this is the image that you should probably have in mind when you think refugees, at least in the DRC context. It is a majority by a lot, women and children coming in right now.
Well, that seems like a good transition to what my next question for you was going to be, which is why should Christians care about people who are displaced in countries that are not America? Give us a good grounding and a theological understanding of why Christians should care.
Yeah. Well, I'll start with this, which is that there are a lot of things to care about in the world. And you can't care about everything. You should care about something. You should do something. To talk about refugees specifically, it is easy to point out that Jesus was a refugee. Jesus's parents were pretty convinced that the authorities in power wanted to kill all the boys his age because there was supposedly a king who was going to come and take over. And so based on the UNHCR's definition of what a refugee is, Jesus was a refugee when he fled into Egypt. and stayed there for a while because he wasn't sure that the next guy in power was gonna come after him, right? So two parents decided, hey, for the sake of our children, we're going to cross the Sinai Peninsula and go into Egypt. So that our pastor recently we were going through the book of James, and we were going through the passage that talks about pure religion is this, to visit the orphan and widow in their distress, right? I found it fascinating the way that our pastor framed that, because he really honed in on that word visit, because it seems so strange. I'm going to visit the widow and the orphan. I'm going to go sit down with them and have tea. And the thing I think that was so powerful was he went through many instances in the Old Testament of when God himself visited us. What did it mean for God, to visit the Egyptians the Israelites in Egypt, right? He delivered them. There's instances where God visited the Israelites in Babylonia and brought them back from exile, where he fed them through famine. And so all these, when Jesus visited us, which it's described that way, he delivered us too. And so that word visit is really powerful. We live in the most affluent society that has ever existed, right? To whom much is given, much is expected. I would say that that refugees are easily the most vulnerable people on earth. If you've had some of the experiences and seen some of the things that I do, that's super easy to enumerate with data and stories. We have a responsibility. I really do believe that. And that's not to mention all the scriptures that talk about the sojourner in your midst, and the Bible does have a specific heart for migrants. So yeah, I'm not a theologian. I am an architect, but I do think it's pretty easy to come away from the Bible saying, hey, these are people that we really should care about.
So sorry, my wife
okay,
is calling me. I don't know why. Do not disturb was turned on.
It's good that you have hers breaking through.
Yeah, that's right. Right.
If you need to take it, that's okay. No worries.
No, it's fine. Yeah, I think about the passage. Word for word in the Bible, you shall love the foreigner. Thus says the Lord, you shall love the foreigner, because you yourselves were exiles in Egypt. And it's from the Old Testament there, but certainly is one of those whole Bible tropes and themes that you see kind of carried over in, the church is often referred to as exiles in a foreign land. And so this is a theme of this is part of what it means to be part of the people of God, is we are exiles. That is a metaphor that the New Testament gives us for the church. And so there's a spiritual, physical reality. This is a lived metaphor in some ways when we love people who are literally exiles. Scott, as I'm on your website, it says every shelter has served over 31,000 refugees around the world. And I just want to say that's fantastic. And just thank you for going on this journey and for building what you're building. And as people are thinking about how to allocate their philanthropy, for people who have philanthropic capital, what would you say to someone who has a lot of capacity to give, financial resources? What happens when people give money to every shelter, and why should donors do that? Why should people give you money, Scott?
Yeah, because people need homes. People need a home to live in. Fundamental to what we do is making sure that refugees get in good homes. When your housing is precarious, when you live in a tarp that's leaking, there is absolutely no way that you could expect a refugee to be self-reliant, to have resiliency, when your baseline needs are not met. And so that's why we focus so much. Obviously I'm an architect, but, if you don't have that kind of baseline security of a good house, and good house, we define as what the refugee thinks is a good house. It may not be a Western standard for house, but we want refugees to live in a home that they feel comfortable in, that feels safe for them, where they can flourish in. the way that we do that is maybe I think is fun and interesting. But the baseline need is just people need housing when you're displaced for decades.
And what happens in the world when someone gives every shelter $50,000, for example?
I'll give you some examples of work that we're doing right now, if that's helpful. We have a big project right now that we call the Brick Mold Lending Project. There's not enough capital, at least in our world, and definitely not institutionally, for refugees to build these types of homes. When a refugee is coming in from the DRC, and again, you should imagine a single mom with kids, statistically, when I say this, they receive $71 in cash on a SIM card and 2 tarps. They statistically have no construction training, and they are expected to build a home for themselves.
And the tarps last 3 to 6 months.
And the tarps last 3 to 6 months. And so it is wise, and we advise them that they start making what are called mud bricks. We discovered that that there was a market for renting brick molds to make your mud bricks that was ultimately costing women $100 to $150 per shelter. That's a meaningful amount of money in this context. And so we started a brick mold lending project where if you are borrowing a brick mold for free from us, you also receive training on how to make your brick better. These ladies are making 1,500 bricks for their homes. With their savings, they're able to hire someone a refugee that has been trained by every shelter to then turn that into a home that will last them a long time, that's properly waterproofed. So they have a lot of skin in the game. Their builder is a fellow refugee who's been trained by us. And your $50,000 donation makes that happen. So we run hardware stores in the refugee camps. We are hopefully starting 12 more this year through refugee vendors. So we have a lot of things. We talk about our work kind of in 3 veins: design, build, supply. If you build a home anywhere in the world, you need suppliers, you need designers, you need builders. And so a lot of our focus in these camps is to make sure those things exist and are healthy, and that we support them, and especially things that were already happening, just maybe not at the scale that you want them to. So we don't want to come in there and create a brand new house if there is a housing typology that works really well. We may take the deficiencies in that, which in this case are mud bricks rehydrating and then structurally failing. And how do we find cost-effective ways to solve that problem by waterproofing and training people to make sure that really affordable way of building a home can actually last that duration. So
Scott, when you talk, I'm just like, you're just still an architect, except you just
I'm an architect, 100% still an architect. And I get really excited about those things.
Yeah, I can tell. Yeah, that's awesome. 20 years, long time. That's a whole kid's childhood. Yeah. So like when we're talking about like think about, for our listeners, think about your childhood and think about the homes you lived in. And just, there are kids in the world who will spend their childhood in a refugee camp, and this is their home.
Yeah.
Like this is the only home they know.
Yes.
And I think that's like, just that seems really compelling to me. Scott, last question for you today. What are you learning in the season about what it means to love like Jesus?
Yeah. Man, so you said earlier, this divorce that nonprofits experience about being successful in their work and not necessarily, their finances being tied to that.
The cool economics of building a nonprofit.
Yeah, we are. We're seeing a few things. We don't receive any federal funding, but we've seen massive aid cuts in Uganda, especially as it relates to refugees. And so we're seeing that all of the food support will be cut off in May. It's not right or good for a refugee to be supported with food for 20 years. That's not good. A refugee needs to be supported when they arrive for several years at least. That's a simple thing that I could say. These refugees are expected to plant food. Well, many of these families are coming over actively right now. And so they haven't had a chance for that. So I'll start with that we're seeing some really critical things being cut right now in the camp that will lead to starvation. Absolutely. And at the same time, we're seeing massive amounts of refugees coming in. Last week, one of my staff was there supporting our team there, and they saw the single largest influx of refugees in a single day while he was there. And so we're seeing this need erupt. And I go back to the thing that you said about, the subscription, the need for the work that we do is so high right now. We as a staff are coming together and making tough decisions about finances so that we can allocate more and more and more towards those things. And so it's, we wish that we could materialize more capital. We're trying to do that. We'd like to do that. But we're looking at our own finances and our own annual budget that we just approved by the board in January and saying, like, where can we reallocate things so that more of this can go to these families in need? And so it's a level of sacrifice that feels, when you run a nonprofit, you feel like you're making quite a lot of sacrifices already. And it's sort of been a period of just digging in a little bit deeper and doing that with our team in a way that's been really incredible. A lot of our team is fasting together, and we've had other people join in that, especially just thinking about the food aid cuts in May. And so it's been spiritually as a staff, it's been an interesting time to just kind of center around what does it mean to be hungry, and what does that mean for your self-reliance? And, I don't know. Yeah, it's been heartbreaking to think about what's coming as a staff, and to try to live that and embody that hunger, even if it's just for 24 hours once a week, has been an interesting, it's been interesting to lead a team through this. So, yeah.
Yeah. Scott, thanks for sharing. Thanks for teaching us about refugee camps and what shelter looks like in refugee camps. Thanks for teaching us about the current moment. And, this is certainly a time for action in the wake of cuts to programs around the world. And thank you for being on kind of the front line of all this. And thank you for joining me today on the podcast.
Well, I really appreciate being here. I feel very blessed to do what I do for a living, and I know that you feel the same about what you do. Yeah. Loving Jesus, or loving like Jesus.
It's a funny path to like the abundant life that I think Jesus invites everyone to. But you kind of feel I don't know. I think to be a nonprofit leader, everyone has times of sacrifice and suffering, but there is, I think, seasons of unique sacrifice in leading a nonprofit, and that proximity to people who are hurting, and being that bridge between people who have capacity, whether that's financial or whether that's expertise or whatever, but people who have capacity and people who have need. And so thanks for being that bridge.
No, absolutely. And you left out one, is people who have the skill sets to bring the solutions to the need. Like you mentioned, Scott, you're an architect all the way through. So is my team, and we see creative ways of solving problems, and it takes that capital, that philanthropy.
Yep.
We can't do it without them, and they can't do it without us. And it's a beautiful partnership. So,
amen. The invitation to grow this week is to check out Moses Sawasawa's photography and learn more about what's happening in the DRC. You can find him on Instagram at Moses Sawasawa. That's SAWASAWA. Thank you to Michael Hansen for editing this episode, Grace Ducatch for the podcast art, and of course to Scott Key for sharing your wisdom and your story with us. If you have feedback on this episode, you can reach me at brian@simplecharity.org. Next time, I share an interview with someone who has served in refugee resettlement in the Atlanta area for decades. We talk about what America's refugee resettlement program is and how it's changed this year. I hope you join me as we continue to learn to love generously like Jesus. Have a great rest of your week.